Hi there, I'm Steve Bauer, County Commissioner from the North End, and this is Commissioner's Corner. And I have a question for you today. What do you do when you have a problem with your neighbor's dog barking all day long? What happens if a neighbor's got a tree that's growing up and clouding your view? What happens if you've hired someone to do a job for you around the house and they really haven't been very satisfactory? They've got your money and you've got a mess on your hands. What happens if you have a teenager who's rebellious and their problems in the relationship, which is to say, what happens if there's a teenager in the house? And I think one of the worst case situations is what happens if you're going through a divorce and you have to try and work with your spouse in terms of assets and what happens with the kids and things. Now, for most of us, and I think most of us have encountered situations like that, here are the kinds of things that we typically do. With the neighbor, we get mad. We try and get revenge or whatever if the neighbor won't do the things that we want them to do. And all that does is make the neighbor mad and really doesn't solve the problem. Sometimes we hire attorneys and we go to court. That ends up being expensive. It can be really time consuming, and at the end you really don't know what the answer is going to be. Sometimes we can call the city or county nuisance abatement folks and they come out, and that's not a very satisfactory process, and it can take a couple of years, and at the end you really don't know whether you got the problem solved, but what you do have is a pretty unhappy neighbor and a relationship that's bad. And with the teenager, I think you just hang on until one of you leaves home. So, none of those are very good outcomes in terms of the kinds of things that we do to try and deal with the normal disputes that we encounter every day. So what if I could tell you that there was a process and an organization in place here in the county that could help you with that, that was faster, that was cheaper, that keeps you in control, that helps you maintain, hopefully improve the relationship with the other party. And at the outcome, the result is that they're more likely to do the things that you want them to do than any of those other alternatives that we've talked about. Well, in fact, there is a process that'll do that. It's called mediation. And there is an organization in this county that's called the Dispute Resolution Center, and they're available using trained volunteers to help you do exactly the things that we've talked about. So we're very fortunate today to have two guests. One of them is Miranda Duncan, who is the Executive Director of the Dispute Resolution Center of Kitsap County. And then we also have Sandy Byrne, who is an experienced volunteer mediator with the program. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So why don't we start off with you, Miranda, telling us a little about what the Dispute Resolution Center is.
Well, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 1995, so we're about 25 years old, and we were specifically founded to provide mediation services to the community. We offer mediation in a variety of cases. I'll just list them if that's a good thing to do now. Small claims, so every week we are in small claims court with volunteer mediators helping parties settle their cases. If they can't settle, they can go to the judge. But we also encourage people to settle before they file cases. So we have our community mediation program, and as you mentioned, neighbors come to us, members of homeowners associations and neighborhood associations, small businesses. The contracting situation you mentioned is typical, and workplace disputes. We do offer mediation in family matters, parenting plans and dissolutions, but also parent youth, and we have a new program called Family Gatherings, and this offers mediation to families that have parents or relatives sort of getting elderly and have new issues cropping up, and brings the whole family together to discuss what might happen. And then we finally have our victim offender mediation program that we offer through the juvenile court when kids have gotten into trouble, and oftentimes there's an opportunity to bring them together with the person that they harmed and work out some kind of a restitution agreement or reconciliation. We also offer facilitation services in addition to mediation services, and that's usually when there's a complex issue with multi-parties and a lot of people at the table.
Well, that's quite, and we'll talk a little more about some of those later, but that's quite a range of services that you offer to folks. And so, but all of them at the core have mediation as the service delivery for doing this. So let's talk a little about mediation. What I find is that most people really don't understand mediation, and the few people who have been involved in some kind of legal situation where you've got an attorney who is telling people whether they're right or wrong and going back and forth between the rooms, putting a lot of pressure on people to come to an agreement. What's different about this kind of mediation process, and what would it look like if people were participating in mediation here? Maybe, Sandy, you can help us give some of that.
Yes, I can. Basically, it's an informal process. It's confidential. Two parties or more, whatever's representing two sides of an issue, explore options and reach solutions and come to an agreement, as you identified earlier, Steve, that fits them, that works for them. And as far as a process, we have what we call an opening, where both of the clients would talk about their past, the background of what brought them there. And that would identify the issues and the interests that they have, which is the present. And that would also lead to an agenda, which is also the present. And then we go into negotiating, which is basically that's starting to look at the future. What is this going to look like in the future? And then a solution is what they would take forward into the future. And it's just basically adhering to a process, having respectful conversation, being able to maybe for the first time understand some of the view of the other party, and basically working together. And even those that don't come to agreement identify that it was a benefit, that it was maybe one of the first experiences they had in a long time, if ever, of sharing respectfully with each other what was going on.
I should share that I'm kind of an evangelist about this, because I've been a mediator with the Dispute Resolution Center. In fact, I've been trained in most of the programs that Miranda talked about, and it is a powerful experience. So let me try and set a picture for you a little bit here. If you were to come to mediation, you'd come into a room, you'd have the folks who have the dispute on both sides of a table, but then you'd have two trained mediators. And these are volunteers, but they're highly trained, and their job is to help you have a discussion in a safe environment with the other party. One of the things that tends to happen when people get into these disputes is they've stopped talking, they've stopped listening to the other person, they think they've heard all of the arguments, and they're just clear that they want the thing that they want and that the other person is wrong. And what really happens in the mediation process is that the mediators, by trying to help you guys work on identifying the issues and talking to each other and understanding each other's perspective, you really try and craft a solution that meets both sides rather than just one winning or losing, which is what normally happens in the court or in the code enforcement process or other things. And the other thing that happens that I think is really critical here is that this is voluntary. So you don't have to be there, and you don't have to agree to any kind, unlike a judge who says, here's the answer, you have to decide what the solution is. And at the end, you write up basically a contract with the other party. And one of the things that I've always thought is most powerful about this process is that, unlike a court mandate or something where you get really low compliance because the other person's really mad and there's very little incentive, they have helped create this solution that meets their needs, and also that it's much more likely that you're going to have agreement, that actually the things that you want to happen are going to happen. You know, a good example, a small claims court, right? If you go there, the only thing the judge can do is decide money issues, but you may want your house cleaned up. And if you go to mediation, you can get that. So it is different than nobody, and the mediators are not deciding who's right and wrong. And I think that's really important, that they're there to try and help the parties have a discussion and to help them craft their own solution. And that's a big difference than all the other alternatives, right?
Often you can, the parties get stuck in right and wrong and who's right, and the dialogue focuses on that, when really they've got a confused mess on their hands and they need a problem-solving approach. That how are we going to fix this? How are we going to make it better? How are we going to make sure it won't happen again? And that's not something that I think is easy to do when you're in the middle of that. You're still trying to promote your viewpoint. But when you take a step back, and I think that's what the process allows you to do, you can actually focus on the problem and not on each other so much. It's kind of the
How long
magic
would
of it.
mediations take? Let's say it's the neighbor with the barking dog.
They can run, we tell them, we actually give them kind of an orientation towards the process before we even ask them to provide their interest in their case. And we tell them that this is going to be a 2 to 3 hour process of walking through and identifying bits and pieces of what can be worked on, like Miranda said. And we ask if there's any time constraints, and then sometimes it even leads to more than one session. But at least the first session would be 2 to 3 hours.
And if you think about, some of these things have been going on for years.
Right, you have to,
If you had the chance of solving that in a couple of hours, and you've established a relationship with the other party that you've, I mean, other than just fighting one another, and you've actually listened to one another. I remember the first one that I ever set up, the people came into the room and one of them said, okay, I'm here because you asked me to come here, but don't expect me to shake hands with this guy. And when they were done, they walked out and they were planning a neighborhood barbecue.
yeah.
And they had fixed all of the problems they came in there for. So I can't underscore enough that this is really a powerful process, and the Dispute Resolution Center is a tremendous resource for the county in terms of making this process available to people. So does this cost?
It does. We're very affordable. We operate on a sliding scale based on income, so we always have to determine that, but it certainly makes it affordable.
So depending on somebody's income, it would vary.
Right.
It typically gets split between both sides and ends up being a lot less than going to an attorney or filing a small claims court or all the
Right.
other things that are the alternatives for folks that are looking at that, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So talk a little about your role as a volunteer mediator here. Will you, Sandy, what's your background? How did you get into it?
This is going to take us a little bit aside here, Steve. Actually, I got into it because I happened to ride home from a tennis match with a colleague of one of the originators of the DRC. That's how I got into it. And she was so enthusiastic about the process and so enthusiastic about what it accomplished, and also there was a training coming up shortly. So that's exactly how I got into it. My background, in fact, many times when we have any kind of in-service and we do the roll call of the people that are there that are generally volunteers, my background was in information technology, so I kind of hang my head a little bit when I say that, because it's not the typical background. More it's people, educators, people that have had community opportunities in service work, social services and things like that are kind of the typical background. I've been doing it since '91. Sometimes I have not been as available as I would like. And it's just been, for me anyway, it's been a growing and a learning process the whole time.
And I think in my case, I picked it up in the mid-90s for a couple of reasons. One, because it was a good way to help people. It's very powerful when you can bring people in who are just caught and can't get past this place and have them leave having solved this problem and this huge pressure taken off of them. And the other was working for government at that point. I saw government caught an awful lot of the time between citizens who were unhappy. They wanted government to resolve the problem. And the problem is we can't. And so no matter what we did, one of them was unhappy. They were mad at us and their neighbor, and it didn't work. So we'll talk a little more about the programs and how to become a volunteer. Right now we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Steve Bauer, County Commissioner, and with me Miranda Duncan, the Executive Director of the Dispute Resolution Center, Kitsap County, and Sandy Byrne, one of the senior mediators with the program. What we want to do now is talk a little more depth about some of the programs, and you know, we could do a whole program on each one of these, couldn't we? I mean, they are so powerful, and I think what's really great is that there's such a range of opportunities. This is really a technique where we'll talk today about some programs that have been developed, but really this is about any kind of a dispute where you're just caught with folks and you want to look at a better solution than hiring an attorney or going through the court system or just getting mad in order to get past it. So let's talk about just the neighbor to neighbor, because I think that's one that most people think about.
Right. I'm trying to remember our most recent case. Two neighbors were having difficulty over kids going in each other's yards, and you know, when it's about your children, it's a very personal thing,
Yeah.
so it can escalate pretty fast. And they were able to come to the center and work something out, and afterwards we talked about involving the children, just so they knew the expectations, and it was just a good example of how if they hadn't come to the mediation, probably would have snowballed, gotten worse, animosities escalated, and you know, it was just a very good ending.
Sandy, have you done many of the neighborhood?
I remember
mediations?
there was one that I did quite a long time ago, I have to admit, and that was speed on the road in front of the house, and it was related more to the small dog than it was to children. But they had lived together beside each other for a long time, and then it had fallen apart over this issue, and the level of tension when they first entered the room, you could feel it, you could touch it. And when they left similar to what you had described there, Steve, where they were shaking hands and they were back talking about barbecues and things like that. So it's just a marvelous process that can really salvage a lot of hard feelings in hard places.
You know, I think one of the hardest things for neighbors is when you get yourself in a dispute with a neighbor and you still have to live next to them every day, and every time you look at them you get mad or you wonder what they're thinking or what they're going to be up to, and the ability to bring them into a room and not only fix the existing problem but to build a relationship where they learn to talk together, so the next time something comes they've got a way to deal with that and to fix it themselves is really powerful. So let's talk about one of the others. One of them that I really like is the teen parent program.
The problem, well, you can imagine if you're a parent with a teenager, you can imagine the myriad of issues that come up. One of our cases was another very rewarding outcome, was a young woman who had left home. She was underage, but she had run away from home. And she herself called the Dispute Resolution Center because she wanted to come back to her family, and she was afraid they wouldn't allow her to come home. And we contacted the parents, and they were willing to sit down with her, and they worked out conditions under which she could come home and kind of resume her place in the family, and worked out well.
You know, some of these, I mean, it's natural as kids grow up to start feeling independent. It's natural for parents. I went through this with my son, of wanting to control them because you're worried about what's going to happen with them, and it just ends up into a huge conflict, and none of us really have training for it. You know, in some cases it escalates into violence, it escalates into the kid getting in the juvenile justice system. It really tears up the home, and what I've seen is that both the teenager and the parent end up feeling helpless. You know, people think it's a power thing. The parent thinks, boy, that kid has really got too much power. The kid thinks a parent, but the fact is they're both in pain and they both feel powerless. And so the ability to create an environment where they can talk to each other in a safe situation and to begin rebuilding that relationship and to rebuild the family is really powerful. And one of the nice things about the teen parent program is that you have young people as one of the mediators. So when the young person walks in there, they don't just see two grown-ups sitting there mediating the whole thing where they feel like the odds are stacked against them. And it teaches young people mediation skills that they can use later on in life.
Right. And that's actually something I should have mentioned, that for many, many years we've been working with schools to provide peer mediation training, and the students themselves learn how to mediate and will help their fellow students resolve conflicts. And then these students have oftentimes come, as they've gotten a little bit older, volunteered at the DRC and been the co-mediator for these kinds of parent-teen conflicts.
So I think one of the, I don't know how to describe this, one of the hardest areas is what's called family mediation, but it's basically divorce. And it deals with parents who are thinking about divorcing and how they go through the whole process of dividing assets and how they provide for the kids afterwards. Even after the divorce, there are a lot of issues that have to deal with visitation and medical care and schooling and all of that kind of stuff. And so a lot of the work in fact, the courts feel so strongly about mediation that in a lot of divorces, they actually mandate, don't they, that people come to mediation if they have difficulties as they go through the next stages?
Right. The parents are required to have a parenting plan in place
Okay.
before they're granted the hearing. And that's something that we've been able to help with quite a bit because we have the forms and there are so many issues that they need to resolve.
Right.
It's overwhelming if they sit down and try and work it out themselves. So I know, Sandy, you've
And
had
it's frequently one that does lead to more than one session. What we try to do for them is help them stay focused on the children and what would be best for the children. And sometimes they lose sight of that because they are very, very frustrated with each other. So that's kind of a talisman for let's pay attention to that.
I think that's a good point. I think a lot of people, regardless of who started it or who's right or who's wrong or who's at fault, after a divorce, people are still pretty angry with each other. And the kids still keep them together, which they wouldn't be otherwise, and they tend to act out through the kids, a lot of that continuing anger. Maybe they're not happy with the way the divorce settlement came out of the judge and some other things. And so this really is, it's hard because you see that family being torn apart, but it really is important and powerful when you can help those parents understand that they're not married, but they're still connected, and to focus back on the kids and help them through one of the toughest times that they're going to have.
And we also sponsor a parent education program, a 4-hour class, Kids First, again, to emphasize that you put your children first, you think about them first and foremost. But a large part of the class does focus on communication and how you bring up difficult conversations, how you have those hard conversations with your co-parent. We don't refer to them as ex, we say co-parent. And get them thinking in terms of, they no longer have to deal with each other as husband and wife, but they do need to think about how they're going to work together to raise those kids.
And those can be pretty tense, and I think there's a good example of if you've got 2 trained volunteers, and you usually have a man and a woman, so you've got balance there, and their only job is to create a safe and secure environment and to help people through the process of having that discussion that they can't have themselves.
Right.
So let's touch on one more, and then I want to talk about training opportunities and opportunities to be volunteers. The small claims court, I mean, if I have somebody, I hire somebody and they do a rotten job, I've got a couple of options. I can go to small claims court, and there I get to choice of going to mediation, or I could come to the DRC in the first place, right?
Right, and you actually no longer have a choice when you come to a small claims court. The court is now requiring that you talk to the mediator first. We explain mediation. If it doesn't sound like it would really be appropriate in this case, they can go back and have their case heard. But for the most part, they will want to go ahead with the mediation. And we also like them to think about mediation, and the court provides them with literature about the DRC, so they can come directly to mediation before they file a case. But either way, we're there to help.
It's been interesting too because with this change of direction where they need to try mediation, and this has only been fairly recent, some of them have almost settled in the hall, and it's been a formality to help them through their agreement. So just making that switch has brought some negotiation between the 2 parties.
So here's 2 cases where the courts have decided there's enough value in mediation that they've required people to do it. And one of the things that's really key that I can almost guarantee you, because I can see you sitting there right now saying this would never work for us, or I'm willing to do it, but this other person wouldn't do it. And what I would ask you to do as you think about this is suspend that part of your belief, that to just trust us that this thing actually works. And if you give it a chance, you would really be surprised at the outcome and results you can get. So let's talk a little about training opportunities, because this program is really built around volunteers who are actually doing the mediation, and I know that you do a lot of training around the year for people who just want to learn mediation skills for their own private or professional life, and for people who want to be volunteers in the program. So talk a little about the training and how many volunteers are active now, will you?
Okay, I will. Glad to. We are having a mediation training in April. We offer training over sort of 2 extended weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, April 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 29th, 30th, and May 1st. I'll put that plug in. It's a 40-hour basic mediation training. It teaches people the process of mediation. We go through kind of a problem-solving process, and the skills that you need, the listening and the problem-solving skills. Many of them, as you say, don't go on to be mediators. They will use it in their work. They might be human resource managers. So it's very practical for all walks of life. If they do want to be a volunteer mediator, they enroll in our internship program. So they continue to learn through our practicum. They observe cases, and we always ask the parties if that's all right. So the interns can just start getting experience with cases firsthand, and after so many observations, then they co-mediate. So they get lots and lots of experience before they become volunteers. We have about 70 volunteers,
Wow.
and I'd say about maybe 45 of them are pretty active.
So this is, I think, really important to recognize, is that there are opportunities for training, and that if you decide you want to do this, you'll get lots of support in terms of training. It's not that you go to the class and then you're just thrown into the room and you expect to do it. You get a lot of support, and for every one of these programs you get support in terms of further training.
Right.
And so it's really a great opportunity, and it's a great opportunity to expand into different areas and develop your skill set. So with that, again, you know, it's a process. I just would ask you, if you get stuck in something where you've got a dispute and it just doesn't seem solvable, before you think about going to the courts or cutting down the neighbor's tree or whatever it is, give the Dispute Resolution Center a call and try mediation. And I think we're going to throw up a slide, but Miranda, tell us where you're located and how people could find you.
We are
Call you.
located at 9004 Washington Avenue Northwest in Old Town Silverdale. And our telephone number is 360-698-0968.
Thanks for tuning in. That's this edition of Commissioner's Corner, and we'll see you next time.